Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to your annual TEDx annual event at Bath. I'm delighted to be here. The topic of my talk this morning, Tourette syndrome, I swear it's no joke, draws from research that Dr. Melina Malley from the University of Oxford and I have been doing over a number of years. And in this research, we have been exploring people's attitudes towards Tourette syndrome and also exploring the lives of individuals with Tourette's and the way that Tourette's affects their daily living. And this topic of joke and humour was not something that we had set out specifically to look at. However, in our most recent research, where we did some qualitative survey research of 68 people with Tourette's and then followed up by 16 in-depth interviews, the aspect of joking and humour really came out and resonated, and it also fitted in with some controversy that occurred last year at Edinburgh's Fringe Festival, because the Edinburgh Fringe Funniest Joke Award was presented to a comedian called Olaf Falafel, and the winning joke was this: "I keep randomly shouting out broccoli and cauliflower. I think I may have Tourette's." And this was controversial because whilst many people with Tourette's syndrome didn't think that there was anything wrong with that joke at all, that actually it was a rather clever play on words, there was also a sense that jokes like that help to perpetuate myths about tics and about Tourette's syndrome. Yet over the years, jokes about Tourette's have resonated, and they've also shaped what people think about the condition, but in a very narrow and specific way. So this theme, if you like, of people joking about Tourette's came up in our most recent research. And I just want to thank all of the research participants and also to Gerald Harris and Dan Zerin, comedians who have Tourette's themselves, for their time and their willingness to talk to us. And I also acknowledge anybody out there listening this morning that has Tourette's syndrome themselves, and also to comedians. Now, you'll also know, because of that introduction, that this idea of humour and joking also is close to my own heart, because although I'm a professor of social policy, I have also done stand-up comedy in the past. And I can't tell you whether I was ever very good at it, but the fact that I'm clearly not a well-known comedian and the fact that I'm still a professor of social policy shows that it wasn't a career move for me. Before I talk about what comedians with Tourette's are actually doing in relation to this topic, let's briefly look at Tourette's syndrome in more detail. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm doing the slide myself. Okay, so Tourette's syndrome, in terms of prevalence in the UK, around about 1% of the UK population has Tourette's, and that mirrors global prevalence. So it's not an insignificant amount of people that we're really talking about. What we know about the condition is it's a neurodevelopmental condition, it's childhood onset, and there are more males than females with it. And it is characterised by tics. So for a diagnosis, one would have to have multiple motor tics. So that would include eye blinking, eye rolling, involuntary movements of hands or head, for example, and at least one vocal or phonic tic present for a year for the diagnosis. And vocal or phonic tics would include maybe unusual sounds or noises such as squeaking, or vocalizations such as echolalia, which means repeating words of other people, or coprolalia, which refers to swearing or shouting out obscenities. Now, the tics usually peak in adolescence, but they may diminish in frequency and intensity by adulthood. And 80% of people with Tourette's have additional conditions, for example, OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder, or ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. But people with Tourette's, it's not a homogeneous group, it's a heterogeneous group of people. Everyone is individual, and so everyone will have their own repertoire of tics, and some people may have some particular tics and other people won't have those same tics. And through, among many other aspects, are the testimonies that people gave us and what they told us about their lives, were that the tics can be very debilitating, and they can be incredibly painful and also sometimes dangerous. So if you think about somebody cooking and they have uncontrollable movements, then that could actually be problematic. In order to authenticate our research, we're using quotes here. So you'll see a lot of these quotes, and these are quotes that we have from people with Tourette syndrome, from our participants. So here's one about the impact on day-to-day lives then. It used to be really uncomfortable, you know, some of the tics, because I used to stretch my mouth open so much and so often. I used to get sores down the side of my mouth from the constant stretching of the skin. And another one, your eye and eyeball swell because you tic that much. And then another quote, my voice cracks and squeaks every once in a while. So I guess I get a number of people who have picked on me. And so this is the reality for people who have tics. And although there's a general awareness within society of Tourette's, we can say that it's very narrow and limited. And unfortunately, this has impacted on people's lives and what people were telling us about the stigmatization that they felt as they were growing up. So one person saying, on a Saturday at a pub and I'll be making noises, his father would be absolutely furious with me because he felt I was showing him up. So the idea that families don't necessarily, or haven't in the past necessarily known what Tourette's is. And of course, diagnosis has not always been forthcoming because medicine hasn't quite caught on, unfortunately, with the science in terms of Tourette's. And then another person, which is maybe even more tragic, I was hidden in the cupboards and the rooms. I was never taken out into public. I was even kept away from my own family, except from my grandparents. And then in school, really teachers, again, not knowing necessarily what it was about particular children that was different, not really understanding why. So this person saying, I was just a naughty boy in school. And then after my diagnosis, I was a naughty boy with a label. So even when they had that diagnosis, that actually schools had not caught up and hadn't really understood what it meant. We also found that within employment that there were barriers and there were blockages in terms of employment, and that people were discriminated against, and that in terms of employers not making reasonable adjustments and not necessarily thinking they even had to for people with Tourette's syndrome. So this person saying, working in a bar and stressful nights, and you start ticking and people start asking questions, poking fun at you, drunk, and you try and speak to your employer about it. I need to stop right now. I need to pull myself away or go home or something because it's going to make me worse. And they don't understand that. And then another example, very big office, very open plan. And obviously I started noises and stuff, not as bad, but obviously they were audible. And then after about 7 days, the contract came to an abrupt end. And I was basically told, you're not needed anymore. So really feeling that even though people with Tourette's syndrome, very just like anyone else in the general population, very gifted and very intelligent and having, would be really fantastic employees. that actually are prejudiced and discriminated against. And then, yet there were other people who really told us about the richness of their lives, that they have great relationships, that they have been able to go through those barriers that have tried to prevent them from self-actualizing, if you like, and that they really have great careers. And this quote exemplifies this. My wife loves my Tourette. She loves it, and it has taken me 1.5 years to accept that that is fine. She thinks it is adorable and hilarious and sweet, and she encourages me and praises me, and it makes life wonderful. But it is difficult even to accept that people accept all my idiosyncrasies. Sorry about that. And here you have somebody then who exemplifies a range of people who, even though life is sweet for them in many ways, they still have this duality of where they maybe don't feel accepted by society or not quite accepted by society. And one of the common themes that came up out of this recent research was this myth, the mythology of Tourette's just being a swearing disease. And the fact that people hone in on that and they pick out on that, and that's what they talk about, but they also make fun of that, and that diminishes people with Tourette's to a kind of a joke. And where our participants were saying, do you know what, there's nothing funny, it's not a joke, having those tics and being awake all night and then being exhausted the next day and trying to go to work when I've been up all night, ticking. So this person's saying every time you see it on TV, they always pick on the swearing and then make fun of it. And of course, the problem with all of this is that swearing or coprolalia is only in about 10% of people with Tourette's. They don't have, a lot of people don't have that tic. And this person's saying, because I don't suffer it, it's not something I can link to and identify with. Swearing sells Tourette's to the media. So this complete kind of misnomer, this complete mythology of what Tourette's really is, but actually that's what's been picked up. So joking aside then, that what we did with this was that finding this idea led us to begin to talk to comedians themselves with Tourette's, and I was surprised myself that there's a growing number of comedians, other people with Tourette's in different art forms as well, in the theatre and in music, but there is this growing number of people who are comedians and who are using their own jokes in their stand-up sets, and they are really acknowledging and showing us that humour is a powerful tool. And what they say about these kinds of jokes that just focus on swearing is this: I just find that typically people are very lazy about how they write the joke, and they just continue to use this stereotype that the only tic is swearing and shouting out obscenities. And so this idea that it's not a clever joke, that it's kind of lazy, the default position is to mock people. And then this other comedian saying, if everyone does a coprolalia joke and everyone remembers that joke, that's why people continue that joke, because that's all they hear. And so again, let's turn this on its head and start thinking about who really has the experience to actually say and use and write jokes about Tourette's. Well, it's the comedians themselves, and they feel that they're on a bit of a mission to educate people, to make people laugh, but use their own experiences of Tourette's and write jokes about those. And this person saying, I'm normalising that here is a person on stage showing who he is. I am just showing you that this is what it is like to be someone like me, and it's not that different from you. And some of these comedians have told us that they actually find it quite therapeutic going on stage because they feel that they can tic, because in other aspects of their lives, and for most of their lives, they've been trying to repress the tics, and that's very difficult for them to do. So when they're on stage, they can just tic as much as they don't have to repress it or suppress it. And then secondly, we're not making fun of the disorder, so we're not mocking, we're not making fun of the disorders or the syndromes. We are doing it in a way of showing that we have been through. We are not laughing at people's experiences. And then I like educating people through comedy of what I have been through. I kind of use it as a way of just telling people how it really is, as opposed to the lazy swearing jokes, which I don't think are even that great. And their strategy does seem to be working. And so people, they're becoming very successful. They're doing their sets to stand out audiences. People are coming to see them again and again. And they've had people come up to them and say things like this. I have had people come up to me and say that they had no idea that Tourette syndrome was the way I describe it. They had no idea that there were more tics. They had no idea that motor tics even existed. And then another person, I have had somebody say, my son or my daughter has it, and I am going to bring them back to your show to see it. So this way of using humour now as a shield and not necessarily a sword to not to mock people, but to enable people to understand. And it's, in a sense, this art form is being used in a very, very positive way. Well, I'm going to leave the last comment, and you might say the last laugh, to one of the comedians. And of course, this resonates with myself in terms of what I was saying about myself at the beginning of this presentation. I have always thought that comedy is much more educative than a lecture, because a lecture is something that, you know, if it is not entertaining enough or interesting enough, people get bored with it. Whereas with comedy, we can keep it light and fun, and we can still get our point across. Well, I hope that you have found this interesting, and I've been willing to talk about it with you more. And if you are interested, here are the references and some references to our work that we've been doing on Tourette's. So thank you very much.